Good evening, everyone. I'm Charles Whitaker, Dean of the Medill School, and I want to thank you for joining us for the third presentation of the Cecilia Weissman Award. As many of you know, this award was created to honor the life and legacy of an esteemed colleague who was taken from us much too soon. Cecilia Vaisman was an amazingly thoughtful and talented journalist, a dedicated and inspirational teacher, and a beloved member of the Medill family. We're grateful to our partners at the National Association of Hispanic Journalists for joining with us to make this award a possibility. And it's an extreme pleasure and honor to present this year's award to Angelica Casas, senior video journalist at BBC News. Over the past several years, Angelica's amazingly trenchant work has eliminated the plight of migrants and members of Latinx communities, both domestically and abroad. Her reporting has taken her throughout the US and Latin America, where she's overseen every aspect of the video journalism process through what she has termed her one-woman band style of production. Her work is certainly in the spirit of the insightful and illuminating journalism that Cecilia Weissman was so devoted to producing and teaching. But I won't say a lot more about Angelica's work. I'll leave that to others who can make a better comparison of Angelica and Cecilia's output, including my colleague, Medill Hopgood, a distinguished professor and journalist in her own right, the advisor of the student chapters of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, as well as the advisor of the Asian American Journalism Association's student chapter here at Northwestern. Medill also was one of Cecilia's closest friends on the Medill faculty. Medill, allow me to turn the proceedings over to you.
Thank you so much, Dean Whitaker. It is truly an honor to be here tonight to honor again my dear, dear beloved friend, Cecilia Weissman. Cecilia and I met in our first year at Medill, and we became fast friends. Her journalism, her friendship, her teaching inspired me thoroughly, and we miss her dearly. But it is truly an honor to recognize her every year and recognize such esteemed journalists who we are lucky to have in our presence. A good friend of mine, I'm happy to see, not enough in person, but Gary Marks, who was Cecilia's husband. He is also an award-winning reporter, investigative reporter, formerly of the Chicago Tribune. He is a numerous time Pulitzer finalist, and he has won our Medill's own Medal of Courage. Gary Marks, it's so great to have you here, and please join us for your introduction.
Thank you very much, Mei-Ling. Hi, how are you? I would first like to thank Medill and NAHJ for keeping Cecilia's legacy alive through this wonderful award. On Monday, just after dawn, I drove to the Chicago lakefront and then walked to the top of a small sand dune filled with poplar trees and tall native grasses. It was Cecilia's favorite spot in the city. We used to come here to look at the water, take in the sun, and in the spring and fall to watch the migratory birds. And there, 6 years ago this week, we lay her to rest. Family and friends, each taking turns spreading her ashes in this majestic, sacred place. Not a day goes by that I don't think about Cecilia, that I don't miss her terribly. Angelica, I don't know if you ever met Cecilia. If you didn't, then you should know that you have a lot to live up to. Cecilia came to this country from Argentina as an infant. Her family first lived in Paterson, New Jersey, then one of the toughest cities in America. Her older siblings were bullied for not speaking English and for being Hispanic. Her mother, Carmen, loved opera and worked in factories before becoming a pattern maker. Her father, Adolfo, was a Boca Juniors football fan who moved from job to job trying to scratch a way into the middle class. Cecilia was lucky. She was fair-skinned and soon spoke English without an accent. Although the youngest in the family, she became the bridge and literally the translator for her parents. Years later, she won a scholarship to Barnard College, studied Latin American politics, and joined the college radio station. She was rad, she was beautiful, and she believed in fighting for truth and justice. Her journalism career took off after graduation, first with a stint at NPR and later as a founding member of Homeland's Productions, which over 3 decades produced some of the finest work out of Latin America. As I've shared in years past during this ceremony, Ceci was a journalist by profession, but an artist at heart. She was an accomplished bass player, and sound and rhythm were sacred to her. So was the human voice, which she used to drive her narratives and anchor her most powerful work. Giving voice to the voiceless, the invisible, and the dispossessed were her North Stars. And this is what Ceci taught her students at Medill, along with the simple truth that great journalism can make this world a better place. She loved Medill so much, she loved her students so much, she loved the mission of journalism so much that she did not want to quit teaching, even as it became obvious that her health was failing. I had to convince her that it was time to let go. Angelica, our family and our children are thrilled that you have won this award in Cecilia's name. Your work is understated, direct, and clear, which amplifies its emotional power. The piece on the Mesa family put a human face on the so-called migrant crisis and showed the universal longing for a better life and the dignity and humanity of those seeking it. Your story on the Munoz family hammered home the tragedy of COVID-19 and its disproportionate impact on Latino families. And I loved your video on Guyman, Oklahoma. It spoke softly, but served as a powerful rejoinder to the false narrative that immigrants take and don't give. Mexican immigrants literally saved a dying town. And like Ceci, you often get out of the way and let your subjects tell their own stories. By doing that, you nurture a trust and intimacy between subject and viewer so lacking in today's media, where superficiality and point of view rule the day. You also have the courage to take on complex subjects, like your piece on being mixed race. It made me think of my own children and their own exploration of identity. These stories and many others have brought honor to our profession. Angelica, your work has indeed made our world a better place. On behalf of our family and children, I congratulate you on winning the 2021 Cecilia Vaisman Award.
Thank you so much, Gary. I am going to start off the talk at Angelica and Angelica's with some of her work, a reel of her work. So here we go.
Vienen huyendo de su país por toda la violencia, porque ya mataron a mi hermano, porque los asaltaron, porque los amenazan de muerte. Ellos tienen una esperanza, si salen en grupo, tienen posibilidades de apoyarse, de protegerse.
Lo que empaqué fue todas mis lágrimas, porque no fue llorar delante de mi hija. Un montón de ilusiones, de anhelos.
I deserve to be in the United States because I'm an American patriot and I'm willing to die for my country. After my military service, I was involved in a shooting incident and I was eventually deported after I finished my prison sentence. I always take responsibility for the fact that I got myself into a situation where I went to prison, but I don't think it's right to deport people that served in the military. Most of us serve with honor. And just because we made mistakes that shouldn't define the rest of our lives.
1, 2, 3. Happy birthday
hardest part from Carlos and Naomi passing away so close together was that they left Isaiah and Nathan without a mom and a dad.
My parents, they caught COVID, then they passed away from it.
There's a lot of Latino folk who don't speak Spanish and Mexicans who don't speak Spanish who are very Mexican and very Latino. Struggling with language is now the new authentic Latino, you know?
I founded Hija de tu Madre because I always kind of struggled with my own identity and reconciling being a part of two worlds, being Mexican, but also being American, also being first generation, daughter of immigrants. So I think growing up, there was a lot of intersectionality with my identity, and I never really felt like my community story or faces were ever represented or told.
Como ustedes saben, estaban detenidos. Largo viaje que han tenido, ¿verdad? So ahorita cuando se bajen es cuando van a estar libres.
This is where a new life begins for some asylum seekers in the United States.
Ya estamos aquí, papá. Yuma. Grita, estamos en Yuma.
Border Patrol has just released them from their custody in Yuma, Arizona. We follow them as they navigated their first day free in the country.
Mucha gente viene a buscar trabajo aquí y pues terminan quedándose aquí. Tal es el caso de mis papás.
Jesus arrived in Guyman when he was only 11. Now, he's one of the few Latino firefighters in town.
Soy paramédico, bombero, rescatista.
This is the story of how Mexican immigrants changed the life of this town.
I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just speaking Spanish.
Ma'am, the reason I asked you for your ID is because I came in here and I saw that you guys are speaking Spanish.
You destroy all my dreams I had.
20 miles north.
This video from May of 2018 was viewed millions of times on social media. What Anna didn't expect was that her life would change drastically after the incident.
My wife, she's been harassed within the community, and my children too. It's been difficult for all of us, the whole family.
Vienen huyendo de su país por toda la violencia, porque
Very powerful work. Angelica, bienvenidos y felicidades. If you want to go ahead and start us off.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mei-Ling, and thank you, NAHJ, thank you, Medill, and everyone involved with the Cecilia Weissman Award for this honor. I don't want to talk for too long, especially not through Zoom, because we're all tired of these types of meetings, but I do want to say a couple of things, and I wrote those things down just so I wouldn't forget anything. So I'll just start reading. There's a song. It's called Los Caminos De La Vida, and some of you might know it. Actually, those of you who are on here and who know me probably do know it. It's a vallenato song written by Colombian Omar Geles, and it sounds a little bit like this. I must have been at a quinceañera or up early on a Sunday morning watching Spanish music videos on Univision when I first heard it. It hits home to me for many reasons. One, because it talks about the role of the mother and I was raised by a single mom who dealt with so many struggles for me to be here today. And it talks about the unexpected challenges that life brings. It says, los caminos de la vida no son los que yo pensaba, no son los que yo creía. The ways of life or the journey of life, they're not what I thought they would be. They're not what I imagined. Son muy difícil de andarlos, difícil de caminarlos. They're in fact very, very difficult to walk. As journalists, we usually enter people's lives in these moments, when their circumstances become unimaginably heavy, when everything has turned upside down and their journey isn't turning out like they thought it would, when they don't know where to go from here. And that leaves us with a great, great responsibility. It becomes our role to tell others about their hardships and also why they're living them. We ask ourselves, what outside forces have dealt them this blow? What is the role of policies and the intersections of issues like racism and climate change and inequality or a pandemic in their misfortune? And we have to do this with dignity and with respect. I'm very fortunate that I get to do that every day as a Latina, as a bilingual, as a woman, and with my camera. This is going to be a show and tell because I'm a visual journalist. So I'm very visual. And this is my life revolves around showing. Just a bit ago, we watched a compilation of some of the short films that I've made in the last couple of years that feature different Latino communities. There's so many more I wish I could have included. You watch the moment Nathan and Isaiah became emotional in visiting their father's grave on his birthday. The boys lost both of their parents to COVID-19 only weeks apart. And their family's story is just one example of how disproportionately Latinos have been affected by the pandemic here in the United States. You heard from some of the migrants that formed part of one of the first ever caravans in 2018, the one that caught the attention of then President Donald Trump. I'll also mention Ana Suda. Her life completely changed after an encounter with Border Patrol was recorded and went viral. She was detained in a Montana gas station for speaking Spanish. The bullying she received from neighbors in the months that followed forced her to leave and start over in El Paso. And then there's El Paso. How could I ever forget this story? You listen to a heartbreaking rendition of Amor Eterno, dedicated to the 23 lives lost in the Walmart shooting. The goal of my work is to create empathy, not sympathy, simply empathy. The capacity within us to truly understand others, whether we agree with them or not. I want people to challenge their perspectives, especially when it comes to Latino communities. And I say communities because Latinos are all different. We heard it many times through the 2020 presidential election, and I'll use this opportunity to remind everyone, even though I'm sure most of you here are very aware that we're not a monolith, we're all so unique and different. I'm very fortunate that this is my job and that this work has consumed me for more than 10 years already. I got into journalism when I was only in high school and had joined the student newspaper and yearbook. Times were very, very different then. We hadn't coined the term digital video, and my current job was pretty much non-existent at the time. It was also a stage of life where I didn't feel completely connected to my roots. I had only ever visited Mexico once in my life at that point, and unfortunately it was for a funeral. I avoided speaking Spanish in the hallways of my high school to not bring attention to myself, and because I was ridiculous in thinking that I didn't want to be associated with the ESL students, most of whom were immigrants or the children of immigrants. After all, the words or the slang that some of my classmates would use to describe newcomers weren't nice. And while I spoke Spanish because it was my first language, I didn't know how to write in Spanish then, or at least I didn't know proper Spanish grammar. But then something happened. I was 15 years old when my tío, my uncle, the strong man who became a father figure to me growing up and who had pioneered his way to the US before anyone else in my family, he started to lose his memory. Let me tell you about him. This is him. He was born in Juan Aldama, Zacatecas in central Mexico. And at an early age, he realized he wanted to be a musician and a performer, but not just any musician. He wanted to be a mariachi, and he was damn good at it. About 45 years ago, he left Mexico and came to San Antonio, Texas to chase his dream of making it big, and my family followed. He was so hardworking. Most of us Latinos are. His music started gaining traction, and he recorded albums, made music videos, and he even very randomly appeared on an episode of General Hospital. His fame may have been more local than national, but it was inspiring. Today, you can still hear his voice on Spotify and anywhere else where you can stream music. His story is a classic story of the realization of the American dream, of how Latinos and immigrants can truly accomplish anything when given the opportunities. And it wasn't all perfect. Nothing ever is. His life had los Caminos de la Vida moments, which only made it more admirable. But the biggest los Caminos de la Vida moment was when he started to forget it all. First, it was forgetting where he was going while driving. And then it was our names. Then it was his relationship to others. And ultimately, he forgot his story. But I knew at the age of 15 that his story was so powerful. I desperately wanted it to be remembered. So I would tell it to anyone I'd come across. And I still do today. It was then that I fell in love with storytelling as a way for us to learn about each other and about the world. I also began to gain a wholesome admiration for where I come from and the characteristics that make Latinos so resilient. And I fell in love with that too. The combination of those two loves was fire inside of me, and it still is. I started to memorize my tío's songs and share them with my friends. In college, I double majored in journalism and Spanish to be able to tell the stories of Latinos in their language and to do it well. In grad school, when I knew I wanted to tell stories in video, my thesis projects were in Mexico. So I visited the country more in my second year of grad school than ever before in my life. Most of us, if not all, are in this industry because we know there is power in the human experience. We need to tell the stories of Latinos so that the world better understands us and all of our complexities. Even in 2021, we are too often absent, not only in news coverage, but in newsrooms too. A recent investigation by the US Government Accountability Office concluded that because of our absence in news or our inaccurate representation in media, Americans don't get a full understanding of Latinos and their contributions. Congressman Joaquin Castro of San Antonio, who has made the inclusion of Latinos in media a principal issue, says that this lack of accurate representation invites politicians and others to exploit negative stereotypes, and this could engender violence against Latinos, like the El Paso shooting, where the gunman targeted Hispanics. I remember interviewing people at the memorial for the victims after the shooting, and one gentleman made me especially sad. He said that this shooting made him question speaking Spanish in public. After all, language is one of the most evident identifiers of who we are. I thought back to me in high school and how I avoided speaking Spanish to my classmates, and I don't ever want anyone to feel that this is the answer. We need to do better. We have to recognize that Latino communities, and really all communities of color, are still on the margins of mainstream news coverage. We're not always incorporated into coverage about larger issues like COVID-19 or the education system or criminal justice reform. And when we are incorporated into that coverage, it's predominantly in Spanish media. We also have to recognize that it's okay for Latinos to cover Latinos, like I do. 20 years ago, newsrooms could get away with not allowing this because of fears of bias. But today, transparency in journalism and a racial reckoning too strong to ignore also means giving Latino journalists the opportunity to represent their own communities in newsrooms and outside in the field. After all, who knows us better than us? I can no longer dismiss who I am in this profession. If I dismiss that, I'm also dismissing the stories I tell when I report on what's important to me. In many instances, the stories about Latino communities that I tell are the stories that I'm living as well. Because I experience life with them and identify with their struggles, I'm better able to report on them. Los Caminos de la Vida feels quite real in this line of duty, and I can't imagine doing anything else than telling their stories. I didn't have the privilege of knowing Cecilia Weissman personally, but I'm sure that she'd agree. Thank you.
Angelica, that was so beautiful. I am certain Cecilia would love you for so many different reasons. And I know her family, members of her family and friends are on this call. And I'm sure they would agree, from everything from your love for music and your dedication to representation and storytelling, and your pride in who you are in this profession. So thank you so much for those really moving words. Let's just start out, and I would ask the participants to please ask questions, because I don't need to dominate the conversation at all. So please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. The first thing I'd start with was, where do you find your stories? What is, how do you find these amazing stories? And then how do you go about reporting them?
I find stories everywhere. That's a hard one. Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what's going on in the world. I usually try to localize big issues that are happening nationally, or big stories. The biggest story, obviously, of the last year and a half has been the pandemic. So I've been trying to find people affected by it. As most of us in this profession, I always try to go to those who are impacted, the ones who, for whatever reason, are having their life changed by big issues. So I've joined so many Facebook groups in the last year, especially because I've been doing a lot of my work remotely, or at least the pre-reporting. I've joined Facebook groups to find, stories in there of people, sharing what they're going through. I've reached out to different groups and different community advocates who know people who are in need for whatever reason. Yeah, I mean, I always try again to take the big story and try to find what's going on at a smaller level or community level. So I use social media a lot. I also like to be, there's this word in Spanish that we use called metiche. I try to be nosy if it comes to, certain topics. I, reach out to different people, schedule calls with, maybe immigration lawyers, or I'm always pretty curious, and I always want to talk to people. So from different places. Of course, I live right now, because I'm back at home with the pandemic. I live with my family, and so they always have a lot of ideas, or they know someone who's affected by something, who went through something else. And yeah, that also helps to be part of a community and part of a family that is very well ingrained in where you live.
Thank you. So you spoke about doing our jobs and reporting and doing storytelling with humility and respect, and a really in dignity, and treating people with dignity, both in the process and in the stories themselves. And this is something that we really hope to convey to our students as we venture out into our communities to tell stories. And it's a challenge. I think students really think a lot about, how do I do this in a respectful way? I mean, how do you do it? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I always approach people whenever I approach them to tell their story, as I'm, approaching anybody else that I meet, as a human first. I think sometimes as journalists, it's hard for us to separate the personal and the professional. And we want to approach people because we know that they're going to help us, report a story, which is then they're going to help us do our work. But I try to approach everybody that I meet as a human first. I usually never meet anybody with the camera in hand. I approach them by myself, presenting myself as a person and genuinely curious about what they're going through. So I try to, make them understand that this is not, me gaining something out of them by telling their story and then walking away and never really, texting them back, or, never. I always try to, seek a relationship with them. whether that means, texting them a lot and building the trust in advance. So if I, already have the person I'm going to interview, I'm constantly, checking in, making sure that they're going to be comfortable whenever I do come and meet them with the camera. I think my job is maybe a little bit more hard because I do have that extra layer. I bring a camera to everything that I do. I can't just write their interview down. So it means a lot of trust building. But again, that trust building comes with me being genuinely interested about who they are, genuinely interested in knowing more about what they're going through, about their hardships. So I approach them as a human first, which I think we mostly all do in this industry, but I do like to keep, an ongoing relationship with my sources, and even after the fact, check in on them. If I've done a story about them, being affected by COVID, I want to know how they're doing later on, if they've fully recovered. I genuinely care about people, which I don't think it's hard. I think a lot of us in this industry care about people, and that's why we do this job. So yeah, I would just say approaching people as a human first, and then as a journalist, I think is how you do this work with a lot of dignity and respect to them.
Thank you so much. You said in your talk, you've thought a lot about who you are in this profession and your identity and your experience and all the and all your background and how that motivates you. I know, again, our students, they don't want to be their identity to disappear when they're like, the perception is that the media industry is completely, not related to their identity, perhaps. And how do you think your identity as a Latina, but also in other identities you might claim that, how do you see it coming out when you're doing your work?
Yeah, I think who I am, it forms types of stories that I want to tell, or the kind of communities that I approach. But also, I think because I am who I am, I'm better able to relate to people. Because, whether it's, relating to them by gender, or relating to them, because they grew up also low income, or, it's all of these life experiences that make you as a person more relatable to others. And so I, use it as background and for context in my reporting, because I have, lived experiences like we all do that I want to shape my reporting with. But also just, always asking editors to, include that Latino voice in whatever coverage that's happening. One of the things that I've made a goal for myself, even if I'm not doing a story specifically about the Latino community, I'm, if I'm doing a story on business or climate, I'm like looking for Latino experts or people in Latino communities who, are doing that type of work, to talk to them. I think one of the things I've realized throughout my reporting is that, Latino stories are stories about everyone, and vice versa. At the end of the day, it's about the human. So it's, I think I've applied both who I am into forming the kinds of stories I want to tell, but also I bring that to the table whenever I'm pitching to my editors. Whenever I know something's going on that maybe not a lot of people are reporting on, but I think is an important story, I, raise that when we're having news meetings. And and when I'm out into the field, I want people to relate to me and to understand that that's why I want to tell their story. And it always comes back also to trust. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I'm going to start asking some of the questions coming from our participants. Hannah asks, and this along this line of questions, how do you feel that reporting in English and Spanish positively impacts your stories? And what are your tips for aspiring bilingual journalists?
Perfect. Well, being able to speak in 2 languages makes you able to report double the amount of stories, I think, because I can both approach people in English, but also using my Spanish. I think that's sometimes an impediment for a lot of the coverage that, news organizations want to do. Maybe they don't send someone to cover a story because they know that, it'll be Spanish speakers that they meet. And so they're like, oh, we have no one to send, right? So I'm definitely proud to be bilingual. And I am proud that gives me, the opportunity to talk to even more people than I would if I only spoke one of the languages. I have throughout the years learned how to code switch pretty quickly. So if I'm out in the field and I, meet people who, speak either language, I can easily go back and forth now. But I think, yeah, I think that the way it opens up opportunities for more storytelling is something that I am completely in love with, and I love being able to tell them in both languages. And I also find pride in telling stories both for an English audience, but then also for a Spanish audience. I'm lucky that at my organization, we do have a Spanish publication. So sometimes, the stories get cross-posted on BBC News and then on BBC Mundo, because I think that aside from just interviewing Spanish people or people who speak Spanish, I also want people who speak and understand Spanish to be able to watch the same stories that I'm reporting on. So I'm glad that I can also, do reporting in that language and publish stories in Spanish so that they're, consuming the content that I'm creating, but also in their language.
When you do stories for BBC Mundo, are you translating or is someone else doing that translation work?
I'm lucky that there's always editors in any process. Usually I'm doing like the translation if I've done a story in English, interviewing sources in English and then translating that to Spanish, maybe with subtitles. Of course, I always want someone to check to make sure I've spelled everything correctly. But yeah, usually whenever I'm doing interviews, I'm the one who, speaks in both and then who can do the translations. Which has been a joy. I'm glad that I mentioned earlier that I double majored when I went to undergrad. I double majored in journalism and Spanish, because even though I spoke Spanish and I grew up speaking it and I speak it every day, with my mom, whenever I'm on the phone with her, now that I'm, back in Texas living at home. But I wanted to know how to properly write it, to do this work. So I double majored just so that it's like checked, I'm certified to do it. I can do it as best as I can. And then of course, I'm always happy to have editors who make sure everything's correct.
Great, thank you. To another comment from Patricia, you are so inspiring, thank you. What advice could you give to young students who want to pursue a career in journalism, specifically covering Latino communities?
Ooh. I think the biggest thing is embedding yourself into them, having, if you're already a Latino or Latina, if you already are part of the community, I think just becoming more involved with them, figuring out what they're doing on the weekends to go hang out with them and see what kind of stories can come afloat there. I think reading a lot about history, because I think we also have to inform our reporting of issues today with context and look back at, oppression in Latin America or even here in the United States against these communities. So really informing ourselves about, history of Latino communities in the US or abroad. Yeah, stay curious. Always go into stories wanting to genuinely learn more about people and, genuinely make connections. So I think always stay curious is one of my biggest things. And then if you are a part of the Latino community, I think never lose that. I think it's a big privilege also. Not only is a responsibility, but it's also a privilege for us to be able to just walk into communities and report on them. And I think we don't think about that too often. So I think you have to, understand that, and then also just, approach people again with humanity.
So another question from participants. I'm sorry, am I frozen? Or is, oops, uh-oh.
Here I am.
Okay, there you are. Oh, the joys of Zoom. We're still adjusting. So another question from participants. Have you had difficulty convincing your editors to include your stories ever? And how have you overcome that, if that is so?
Yeah, I mean, pitching any story, about Latino communities or not is always hard. And I always like to be challenged by my editors and, to have them ask me to dig deeper and to have them ask me questions that I sometimes don't already know the answers to because maybe my pitch wasn't prepared enough. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm lucky in a way that 50% of my pitches normally get accepted and 50% don't. Like it's always half and half, but I learned through that process. I have had some stories that I really have to. I feel like I'm, really pushing to convince them to let me do it because I think it's important. But maybe they're, hesitant for whatever reason. Maybe the story isn't really, very newsy. Because at the end of the day, I work for a news organization, so I can't just do features all the time. So there have been times that I have to convince them that it's, worth pursuing. Again, whether it's about communities or not, I think that's just a part of this work. I think it helps that I'm currently, at BBC News in my newsroom, at least on the English side here in the US, I'm the only Latina. So I think that they do take what I say usually, very seriously, and they recognize that my voice is important in the newsroom because it's, unique and it's different from everybody else's. But yeah, I mean, I think we learn through the challenges of having to pitch and pitch and pitch again, right? Of having to like take back the pitch and like turning it upside down and making more calls and informing ourselves just to make it better and to understand the story even more. So yeah, I have had to fight for some stories, but I think that in the end, like they come to terms with understanding that they're important, even if they're not the biggest story of the day. What communities across the US are going through is always important.
Thank you. From one of our video professors, Craig Duff, from the clips we watch, your cinematography is lovely and you bring the audience into the scene so nicely. What advice do you have for Medill video journalism students about how to cover a place, scene, or moment, what to look for and ask before you get there? And what tips can you offer about how to the best way to visualize a story? So 3-part question.
Perfect. I love these types of technical questions because I'm the kind of person that before I go out, I like to storyboard the stories. You don't always know what you're going to arrive to. Sometimes it's breaking news or you don't really have a sense of what's going on. So you can only imagine what you're going to get there too. But I do like to storyboard in advance. I plan my wide, medium, and close-up shots. I, look for repetition when I'm filming. If someone's walking back and forth, I place my camera so it's still and people walk in and out of the frame. I usually, whenever I'm going to something that is that's going to be pretty controlled, like a controlled environment, like if it's an interview in someone's home, I like to ask them in advance for photos. If they don't mind, I ask them to take a photo of maybe their living room or their dining area, the bedroom, to know in advance maybe where I can set up for the interview. I love the use of natural light. Even though I have light kits that I can bring with me, I'm always looking for windows inside of homes and buildings, to light them naturally and so it doesn't look too artificial. I think also natural light in interviews makes people just feel more comfortable because they don't have, something big shining in their faces, and they just, I feel, open up a bit more when it's more candid and it's just you with them and inside of a space and not so many, lights and things in the room. So yeah, I do ask for photos in advance if it's controlled environments, just to get a sense, or if I know that I'm going into hospital, maybe I look up their YouTube page and see if they've posted videos before, just to kind of check out what the space looks for. Yeah, I do like to be as, as prepared as possible, but sometimes you can't be, right? For the Arizona story that we showed earlier about the asylum seekers arriving to Arizona, I went to go film that with a dear colleague, Patricia from BBC Mundo, and we didn't know what we were getting into. We, pitched it to our editors and pretty much told them like, hey, we won't find a main character until we go there, right? Because that's just how some stories are. Like you don't necessarily have every asylum seeker's phone number to call them up in advance. So we didn't know what we were going to get there to or what things would look like. So that I always try to, like, if it's something like that where the environment's going to surprise me, I try to just take like 5 minutes to look around, walk through, see what kind of things are happening, what kind of audio you'd be grabbing. If there's like, very candid conversations going on, I try to figure out where that's going on. But yeah, I just kind of take this space in for a little bit so that I can better, inform my production and inform my filming. But yeah, I mean, each story is different. The way that I try to approach the filming, sometimes I want people, especially if it's something very intimate or very personal, I want them looking straight into the camera so that the viewer feels like they're being spoken to. Sometimes if it's for news, maybe not so much. Maybe it's more of like your standard interview shot. But it really depends on the story. I like to think through it before actually going out to film, so that it's not random and it feels more thought out and thoughtful. I try to approach my interviews and my filming with thoughtfulness, not only in the questions I'm going to ask, but also just like in the filming, and I wanted to show what's going on in a place. Also, earlier we watched a little bit of Nathan and Isaiah going to their father's gravesite to sing to him on his birthday after he passed away. So I remember arriving to that and just kind of, because I want people to be transported by my stories and to feel like they're there with the people that they're watching, I just kind of take a step back. And that's why a lot of those are wide shots, because I just want people to have a look at what's going on and set the scene. And then of course I, later zoomed in when they became emotional. But I think you really want to consider the job of, video journalism as someone who is taking people where they can't go themselves, and then ask yourself, if I wouldn't be here, what would I want to see? Because that's what people would be curious to see also when they watch your pieces. Sorry if it was too long.
Yeah, no, that's great.
No,
I love it. I love it. And it really comes through in your work and your storytelling here with us. From Sal, this is bouncing around a bit, but you mentioned watching Univision while growing up. Could you mention other Spanish media or bilingual media, I'll add that you watched growing up, and how has it influenced your craft and career? And I'm going to add a little bit, like, what do you like now?
Perfect. So yeah, I mean, growing up, because I lived in a home where, my mom only spoke Spanish, so does my grandma. My mom is a big fan of local news, and she would always be watching the local Univision station, Telemundo sometimes. We hardly ever watched English language news. So it was a lot of that. And honestly, maybe it was only that. Like, that's what we never had cable. We, weren't watching the big networks. We were always watching that. But I think what even that taught me, because most of that was local reporting, is to, again, always look for those impacted, because that's what local reporting does. If there's a big story happening in the country, local reporters go out and find the local angle of what's happening in neighborhoods. So I think that, watching local and Spanish news really informed me on kind of how to do reporting that really, zooms in per se. Yeah, so I grew up watching those two. Now I, of course, consume a lot of content all the time. I mean, I read El País, I read, of course, BBC Mundo, which everybody should read. We do a lot of lovely explainer videos on YouTube about everything that's happening in the world. Colleagues, do explainer style videos and pretty much inform you on, whether it's COVID or whether it's, something business related. I consume a lot of our Spanish language coverage. And then also I just follow, I think more so than actual news organizations, I follow a lot of reporters and reporters who I, really like their work, or I think that their work always is very honest, and it's work that nobody else is doing. I follow a lot of people on Instagram or on Twitter, and I'm always reading their content. Yeah, I would say, and I would even suggest, for students watching, is to follow people whose work that you admire, because you'll start learning from them the more you read or the more you watch, in my case, because I do video, and that'll just kind of start not shaping your own work, but you'll start finding your own style, because you'll see what similarities you share with them.
Thank you. From Fabiola, Angelica, thank you for your incredible work. Being a one-woman band can be challenging. What are some practical tips you can share with storytellers who are in the same situation?
Ew. I used to use the term one woman band a lot because I thought that it was cool that I was doing these stories by myself and going out into the field. I was my own driver, my own interviewer. I was the one filming. I was the one, producing and everything. But I'm hoping that our industry is moving away from that because it's not sustainable. It's very difficult. And as a woman, even harder for safety reasons. I often get looked at whenever I'm, either, traveling through the airport or arriving at a hotel maybe, or somewhere where I'm going to interview. And I'm, by myself, carrying out all my stuff from the car. It's, a lot of expensive and big equipment, my tripods. There are always safety concerns too. I think there, just as there are cons, there are also a lot of pros. I also like being in every step of the process of storytelling. So I like putting my piece together after I filmed it. I like being the one who films it after I've been in touch with my sources for, weeks or months, depending on the story. So as much as there are, cons, there are pros, but there are a lot of challenges. I don't know if I have advice, actually. If anyone has advice for me, I would love to take it. If anything, I've learned that, to always, especially if your work involves travel, if you're going somewhere and it's by yourself, I think also to enjoy where you're going, which is not something I did at the beginning of my job, or, of having this this privilege of traveling through the BBC and to do stories for them. But now whenever I go to a place, I really want to get a sense of where I am. So I, try, even if it's, sneak somewhere for dinner or something, just to see the place a little bit. But yeah, if anyone has tips on how to better be a one-woman band, please send them my way. Sorry.
It's not easy. I mean, it's a lot of work to do all those things. And to that note, so one of our viewers asked, where do you get your motivation to kind of to be in this business, and how can you stay motivated to do this kind of work? Because it's very rewarding, but it's also tiring, right? It takes a lot.
Yeah, I owe a lot to my sources. If it weren't for the people that I'm meeting, and I don't want to start crying, I just always get emotional, like thinking about how people just let me into their lives to tell their stories. And I want to do it well because of them. People always say, like, how do you do this work if it must be so also traumatic? If you're, I reported on, mass shootings, on immigration, on, a pandemic, like a lot of things that people are struggling with. I'm there to ask them questions. But it's always so rewarding then whenever you publish a story and people are watching it and it's, getting their stories, getting the attention that it deserves. I find out so much motivation in the people that I interview and that I meet. Again, I try to build relationships with them and follow their story even after the story has published, because I want to know what they're up to and I'm genuinely curious. But I get a lot of motivation from them, and then of course from my family. My mom struggled and fought a lot for me, and I have a twin sister, for us to be where we are today, alone, as a migrant, as someone who still, doesn't completely understand English, but she had to navigate so much, when she got to this country, and even today, that I can't let myself not do a good job, because I know that I have her to live up to, and I have, of course, everybody that I work with as well, my colleagues. They motivate me a lot. We motivate each other because this work is tough and it's hard, and but it's also a privilege. So I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
So what is your self-care then? What do you love to do what after work, or to kind of take care of yourself these are intense subjects, not always, right? You do some pretty fun stories too, but how do you take care of yourself?
Still trying to figure that out. I like to connect with people both for my job, but also outside of my job. The friends that I have, I want to, spend a lot of time with them. And I've started running this year, both because of the pandemic, but I've, kept going because it just kind of frees my mind a bit. So there's that as well. And I think another thing that maybe I consider it self-care because I like to talk about, I think it's really healing to talk about the work that I do. I've started mentoring young journalists through Latinas in Journalism program. So I think that even though it sounds like work, I think mentoring also has helped me to heal the trauma that I usually report on because I'm talking to people about it. And I think that that's always very helpful. So I also have been, if this counts, I've been shadowing my mom in the kitchen now that I'm back home. So I've been learning how to cook and learning recipes and feeling like there's a reconnection to my culture in that way as well.
What are you learning to cook?
Well, my favorite meal is pozole. So I feel like I've learned to make it by watching her. But yeah, anything that's really, Mexican food is of course her specialty. So if you ever invite me over, Medill, maybe I'll make you some rice and some fajitas or something.
That sounds amazing. We'll fly you right up.
I'll
You
be
won't want to come up here when it's really, really cold though. So, but pozole would work for that weather. So I just have another question and then we'll wrap up. You talked really about diversity within the Latinx community. What did you observe during the 2020 election about this diversity and how did it shape your coverage?
Latinos are so different and so unique, groups within the Latino community. Of course, we've all seen the trend of, more Latinos voting Republican than before, but also I think that aside from that, Latinos are diverse because of the places of where they come from. That's obviously the biggest thing. But they're business owners, right? They're getting educated, Latinos are going to school and they're, very educated and they're very informed when it comes to voting. They care about issues aside from just immigration, which is like the big misconception that we all have of this community, that's the biggest issue, but it's actually not. It's, further down the line after the economy, after, a lot of Latinos care about climate change, either because their families left places because of the effect of climate change that's going on in their countries back home. So it's just so different, and so I think because of it, it really shaped my reporting because I never approached anything making assumptions. I could be interviewing a Latino about how they're going to vote, but I'm not already thinking that they're going to vote Democrat or that they're going to support X candidate. I think I learned to go in not making assumptions, because everybody thinks differently and everybody's informed also differently. Because Latinos don't only speak Spanish, they also speak English. They're getting their news from a myriad of places. And so the information that they're consuming is different. It's almost, I really don't like to use the term Latino community. It's almost Latino communities plural, because there are just so many within. So if anything, it makes me really excited because there's just more stories for me to report on, right? I don't have to just do, reporting on the Mexican American community because that's where I belong. I can, go outside of that. And I have through my reporting, because again, it's so diverse. And so, I think it shaped my coverage because I didn't go in with assumptions. And I really, the stories that I did about the communities during the election, I think I really let people just speak their opinions so that the audience could be surprised whenever they learned about their ideologies.
So for our final question of the night, I am just gonna ask it. I'm going to take my moderator privilege here and ask the last question. So not to give away any great tips or stories that you're already doing, but is there a story that you just really want to do or that you have your eye on right now? Not that you have to give away your secrets and your methods, but what is a story that you're really excited about that you hope you get to do?
The story that I've been thinking about every single day since I pitched it is one that I'll actually be filming later this fall. And it's a story that was informed by my background, and because a lot of my family became citizens, years ago after they immigrated and arrived here. I'm going to be doing a story or a mid-form documentary on some citizenship classes happening here at a local library. So I'm going to be going to the citizenship classes and meeting people who go there who are in the process of becoming naturalized, because I think that we often overlook that process. So I'm going to be following people who are going to the classes to become American citizens, and really, I think, reporting on the nuances of what it means to be American, of what it means to contribute to the country where you live in as an immigrant. I'm very excited about that, again, because it's informed by my background. I've been asking my mom a lot about, when she became a citizen and how her ceremony went, because I was too small to remember it now. I think that moment's very special and very intimate and very personal. And so I am excited to film with that class later this fall.
Can't wait to see it. Well, thank you so much, and felicidades. And I hope we see each other again, and you maybe come visit us up at Medill sometime.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for this honor.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night. Buenas noches.